Very special edition of Weather Unfiltered. I'm Mike Bettis.
I'm Alex Wilson, of course, with the former director of the National Hurricane Center, Dr. Rick Knabb. You remember that day very well and the days that followed.
Yeah, at this hour on the 28th of August, 20 years ago, it was still a Category 5, and overnight is when it became obvious that this was growing in size, even though the maximum winds were coming down.
The results of that, obviously, were catastrophic along the Gulf Coast.
Yeah, tomorrow marks 20 years since Katrina made landfall on the Gulf Coast. So we've got live reports for you tonight. We have Stephanie Abrams.
Still to come here on Weather Unfiltered. Back with Dr. Knabb, though, who worked at the National Hurricane Center at the time. Dr. Knabb, the night before landfall, which would have been 20 years ago tonight, was a really scary time for the Gulf Coast.
Yeah, because at this hour, operationally, Hurricane Center Advisory still had as a Category 5. So everybody was thinking a Category 5 is coming to New Orleans, and this is going to be a disaster. Now, it ended up being, I think, an even worse disaster than we even envisioned, even though it ended up being a Category 3 at landfall, but we could start to see at this hour the night before that it was going to be horizontally larger. But remember, as it was coming ashore, that's not when the flooding in New Orleans immediately started. It took well into that evening for all the levees to start breaking and for the New Orleans disaster to unfold, even though Mississippi had been hit really hard tomorrow morning on August 29th.
So the disaster was what you expected in some areas, and then maybe as bad as you thought it would be because of a different reason in New Orleans.
Yeah, the storm surge forecast was right for the wrong reason. And remember, this was before present-day storm surge modeling and before the storm surge warning. But I think in many ways that became academic because the word was out that storm surge was going to be a big deal. We just didn't know if the levees would hold. That was the big question the night before. Obviously, they did not.
We have some more details coming up here on that landfall of Katrina 20 years ago this weekend. Coming up at 40 past the hour. Technologically advanced after that to keep the waters back. And I think for so many people, Steph, you know, their life, like Katrina was a marker for them, right? Like their life is before Katrina, and then their life is after Katrina. We're going through, but I think the memory that so many of us in America have seared into our brains is all these people on their roofs being plucked off their roofs by helicopters, and that went on for a week, if not longer in some instances. So Stephanie, thank you.
Here as we look back at 20 years after Hurricane Katrina, of course, the anniversary of landfall tomorrow. Many more stories coming up. Such a tragic story story is told by so many people here remembering the 20th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina there in the Gulf Coast. We've got our crews out in those communities that were so much affected. Our senior national correspondent Justin Michaels is one of them.
Yeah, Justin, this was, you know, a place that was literally run over by this hurricane, and I've got to imagine for so many that that call that place home, a very somber memorial will take place tomorrow.
Right.
As residents of the Gulf Coast watched Katrina, a few had closer eyes on the storm than those folks at the National Hurricane Center. Their work not only to save lives, but to look back at what we can do better when the next storm forms. And Mike and Dr. Knabb, I know you've done that so much in the aftermath of storms, writing these reports. Former director joins us now.
Welcome, everyone, to the show. I'm Mike Bettis.
I'm Alex Wilson, of course, former director of the National Hurricane Center. With us, Dr. Rick Knabb. We're talking to your former boss, former director, Max Mayfield. You were there, though, and you've talked about what it was like in the lead-up, looking at this storm, knowing what it could do to that area.
Yeah, imagine how different it was the night before Katrina made landfall as compared to the night before Ida made landfall. We did not have that risk reduction system around New Orleans. We knew just how vulnerable New Orleans was, especially to storm surge.
Absolutely. We saw how it all ended up playing out, unfortunately. Now, tomorrow marks 20 years since Hurricane Katrina made landfall on the Gulf Coast. We're going to have live reports tonight with Stephanie Abrams.
Homes flooded, and people then have to make the decision. Do we leave? Do we rebuild? And I love that you've told so many stories this week of people who said, you know what, I wanted to stay, rebuild the community, tell the stories to the younger generations.
Yeah. And that's the thing, and you get a mix here.
And yeah, you understand the fear of people thinking, you know, do I want to rebuild there where, you know, I lost everything? And we've seen people move to other communities.
It really is.
But then there's also the people who say, nah, I want to stay. This is home. And Dr. Knabb, they've made some significant progress, obviously. Anywhere along the Gulf Coast, obviously still vulnerable to hurricanes.
Yeah, and the vulnerability has definitely changed, whether or not you are inside or outside of the risk reduction system built around New Orleans after Katrina. Obviously, Ida showed us that New Orleans fared a lot better with that new system in place, but there are so many parts of southeast Louisiana that still got double-digit storm surge in Ida, and the Mississippi coast just about as vulnerable as they've ever been.
And it was wiped out by Katrina.
Yeah.
And, you go back to 20 years ago tonight. It was a Category 5. And so the storm surge was going to be baked in, even though we know that it came down in wind speed before landfall. But if you look at the Mississippi coastline, there were places there where there was debris that was pushed a half a mile inland, and there were debris lines that set up, and those were homes and businesses and restaurants and you name it that just completely got washed away.
And because of some bays and rivers that go inland from the Mississippi coast, some of the storm surge went multiple miles inland in those areas and crossed Interstate 10, which is way inland. So the massive amount of storm surge in terms of height and extent, just unforgettable.
Yeah, it's one of those storms I think that sticks with a lot of people. Well, coming up at 40 after, obviously it stuck with you. Now, Katrina, obviously one of the headliners, blockbusters of what was a blockbuster season. Of course, the 2005 hurricane season in the Atlantic brought us 28 named storms, 15 of those hurricanes, 7 of those major hurricanes, many landfalls, many records set during that season. There's Hurricane Katrina. We remember that first landfall in Florida. Then it moved over the Gulf where it rapidly strengthened into a Category 5 and grew in size before landfall. Of course, dropping in strength right before landfall, but at that point it was so big, so powerful, it didn't really make much of a difference. And of course, we continue to tell the stories here as we approach the 20th anniversary here tomorrow. But
Edition of the show tonight. I'm Mike Bettis.
I'm Alex Wilson, of course, former director of the National Hurricane Center, Dr. Rick Knabb with us. I know your former boss joins us tonight. And you remember, writing advisories leading up to this historic storm.
Yeah, this was my first stint at the Hurricane Center as a forecaster, and we all shared this terrible feeling that something really bad was about to happen on this night 20 years ago, just a few hours before landfall.
I think most of America shared that same sentiment, right? We were all on pins and needles wondering what was going to happen.
Yeah, I think everybody remembers watching the TV, waiting to see, and images in the immediate aftermath. Then,
Well, let's show you 20 years ago tonight what Katrina looked like, because it was a Category 5 hurricane, Dr. Knabb. Folks were bracing for what was to come, and I don't know if anyone really knew what was about to come, because the forecast for storm surge was astronomical, and people are like, we've never seen that before. Could that really happen?
No, and I think the night before, there was pretty high confidence of what was going to happen on the Mississippi coast. There wasn't much doubt that it was going to be a devastating storm surge there, but because the track forecast got a little more confident that maybe New Orleans was going to be on the west side, there was a growing feeling that, well, maybe New Orleans will catch a break and they won't get the worst.
Do you think there was too much focus on New Orleans and maybe not enough on other locations?
To some extent nationally, but locally, we had the attention of the Mississippi emergency managers, and the people were evacuating. Though not everybody did, because some people survived Camille and thought if they got through that, they could get Katrina, and they didn't evacuate. But even as the storm was coming ashore, it wasn't known yet how bad it was going to be for New Orleans, because it did take several hours for the floodwaters to start to enter the city. So nobody really knew how bad it was going to be in New Orleans, even at the time the center came ashore. But it became obvious later that night, tomorrow night.
Seeing is believing, and we talk about how people always focus on the wind with these storms. We look at the wind data. Here they got to see the result of the surge. Do you think this is one of those, critical pivot points for people when they think about what these storms do?
Absolutely. And, because I was involved in writing the report for Katrina, when it was issued and we reanalyzed the intensity to be Category 3 on the wind scale, the backlash that I got was very energetic, because people were thinking, how dare you downgrade the category of a hurricane when it was this bad? And that's when we knew, okay, now we've got to change how we communicate about hurricanes, de-emphasize the category, talk more about size, and focus on the individual hazards. And Katrina, along with a lot of other 2005 events, really pushed us forward toward the storm surge warning.
You think there was this disconnect between category and surge that we didn't really think about before this, maybe?
Yes, and Katrina changed how we handle category, how we handle separating storm surge from the hurricane force winds.
Well, strong storms, meanwhile, today have led
The heat and humidity, right? A lot of us miss the amount of daylight hours we get.
Yeah, especially when you get to like November and it's dark at 5:20 in the afternoon. So but we got a little ways to go for that. Let's enjoy our Labor Day in the meantime. Welcome back into Weather Unfiltered on this Thursday. I'm Alex Wilson.
I'm Mike Bettis, and Dr. Knapp's going to be with us in just a minute. But we're talking about some rain, some potential flooding tonight across some of our, starting with Charlie.
And this has a connection with Katrina because the comparison between Katrina and Charlie really brought forth a discussion about hurricane size. Katrina was a huge Cat 3. Charlie was a tiny Cat 4.
But that small size storm did a ton of damage in the communities that were hit so hard.
Yeah, it was basically an oversized tornado.
Yeah.
She missed the core by just a few miles. Got to get those folks out of mobile homes.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were not necessarily surprised, but maybe ill-prepared for what the storm actually brought. All right, number 14, much more recent in memory. This was last year's Milton.
Yeah, and this brought back shades of Rita in terms of how strong it was over the Gulf. This is along the same lines. It's like tied for fourth with Rita for the lowest pressure ever for a hurricane in the Atlantic Basin. If be needed, don't let those false alarms keep you from evacuating next time.
All right, number 13 on your list is Hurricane Florence.
This is the category slow, prime example. That's where this phrase really started because it was a Cat 4 offshore, weakened to a Cat 1, and then slowed down. And so we've got, again, de-emphasized the category because when it's weakening as it's approaching the shore, people sort of let their guard down and ended up being
The initial track, I think so many people thought it was going to move away. All right, number 12, we go to Ike. This was in 2000 or the late 2000s, 2008.
Yeah, so this, again, was not a major hurricane when it made landfall, not Category 3 or stronger, but it had been a major and then weakened but got larger. Where we heard that before. So this was 3 years after Katrina, and it's got a similar kind of structural change and still was a major disaster for southeastern Texans. Let's do it for Texas.
All right, number 11. This one may be a surprise to people because I think this is kind of, especially in recent years, one of the big ones we think of, and that's Irma.
Yeah, and this was the really long-lived Cat 5. I mean, this was a Category 5 hurricane for 60 straight hours. 2.5 elderly or vulnerable person to help get them through this coming hurricane season.
Was it the track of that one that basically went up the peninsula of Florida that was really the undoing of it?
Yes, and you remember the reverse surge in Tampa and the big surge in the southeast?
Well, it was 20 years ago. At this time, we had a Category 5, 160-mile-per-hour hurricane on our hands. It was large. It was sprawling. It was, ready to take dead aim at the Gulf Coast.
Yeah, and at this hour on that night, it wasn't certain how intense Katrina was anymore because the pressure was still really low, but the aircraft that were out there were starting to show the maximum winds coming down, but it kept getting horizontally larger. So we were kind of scratching our heads like, is this going to weaken before landfall? But if it does, is it going to get larger? So we knew either way, it was going to be really bad. We just didn't know exactly how New Orleans would fare, given that they were probably going to be on the left-hand side of the track, as opposed to the Mississippi coast getting full on the right side.
And as we've discussed, so many times people look at the wind. That's kind of the headliner when we look at the forecast. But not to say it hadn't happened with previous storms. This is one where people all across the country, all across the world, got to truly see the power of water.
Yeah, and I think we know that because it peaked out at Category 5, that is mainly what got everybody's attention, because this was before we had a storm surge warning. This is before we had a lot of the communication mechanisms and forecasting abilities that we do now. But the fact that it made landfall as a large Category 3 has taught us a lot about how we have to focus on the hazards. I mean, there's so many lessons to learn from Katrina, but the exact track, the exact wind category doesn't tell the whole story, and it certainly did not tell the whole story about what happened in Katrina.
Yeah, for sure. Ended up becoming one of the worst disasters in American history. And coming up at 40 after the hour, we're going to...
Cat.
Yeah, that's a bad sign.
It's a bad sign.
Like,
they lose everybody who's fun.
Alex would be fine.
Alex would be fine.
Mike would be fine.
Yeah, not going to lose us. Yeah. Dr. Naba? Nope.
You just call him Naba?
Yeah. Like ABBA, but Nab.
Yeah, but Yabba Nabba do.
Yeah, yeah. But he's out of town. He's leaving you.
I feel for you, Dallas.
Yeah.
Tough time.
It's been a tough day. You know, and then you'd had to sit at the airport. You were trying to
Counting down the top 25 hurricanes of the last 25 years as put together by our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb. Now, the numbers that we saw, we did 10 of them yesterday. We're doing 10 tonight. We're going to settle for the top 5 for us tomorrow. But there's a look at all 25. Yeah. And here's a look at storm number 10, Dr. Knabb. Which one is that?
Well, out of these 5 that we're going to talk about right now, 3 of them reached Category 5 strength. But only Michael made landfall in the U.S. as a Category 5. In fact, it's the only Cat 5 U.S. mainland landfall in the last 25 years, and it defied the odds. It looked like wind shear would limit its intensity over the eastern Gulf, but that was not the case. 4th strongest hurricane by wind to make landfall in the U.S. It's the latest Cat 5 in the U.S., 3rd lowest landfall pressure, just ahead of 920. That was Katrina. We lost 59 people, $31 billion storm, which, again, similar cost as Florence in the same year. One was a Cat 5, one was a Cat Slow, right?
Yeah.
Now, since Michael, some changes have happened in the Panhandle. Building code enforcement has been addressed, increased. Fortified roofs expanded in that area as they've been rebuilding. And what we learned from Michael is you don't have to let a Cat 5 hurricane do what it does without us fighting back. There were some success stories at the coast and inland that showed that some homes did better than others, and we can affordably, in many cases, withstand wind and surge.
And you showed us one of those homes around Mexico Beach that did survive the storm. For number 9, we go back to that, powerhouse 2005 season with Wilma, one of the later systems, but still huge.
Yeah. Now, this was another Category 5 hurricane that rapidly intensified more quickly and set low pressure records while it was in the Northwest Caribbean. And then Wilma taught us what a former Cat 5 can do so that the people who don't have the means can get through those distribution lines more quickly.
All right, number 8 on your list, Dr. Knabb, is Hurricane Ida. Made landfall in the south but caused big issues all the way into the north.
Yeah, so this was bad enough in Louisiana, although not as bad as it would have been without the risk reduction system built after Katrina. This is a nightmare track for New Orleans without that risk reduction system, but still double-digit storm surge in the area around.
7 is Hurricane Dorian. We watched this move over the Bahamas as a powerful Category 5 hurricane.
Yeah, now as bad as it was internationally in the Bahamas, it's on the list because of what it could have been for the U.S. We only missed by a few dozen miles what I think could have ended up being the most expensive hurricane disaster in U.S. history. You take a Cat 5 and you stall it over Florida? I mean,
6 on your list, one that no one will soon forget, Sandy.
Yeah, so this was a record large hurricane. Its structure made it half a hurricane, half a snowstorm, and that left hook in the track. We've just not ever seen anything the likes of Sandy that was a record large hurricane along its entire track. It caused...
Yeah, good food for thought. And tuning tomorrow for Dr. Knabb's Top 5.
Up on the weather stories as we move into our Friday, of course, big holiday weekend coming up too. We've got storms rolling through the southeast overnight. They're going to stick around with us through the weekend as well. I know it's not the greatest news if the southeast is part of your Labor Day weekend plans. Here's tomorrow, or tonight into tomorrow morning. We've got some of those heavy rain showers moving through sections of the Arklatex, Mississippi, Alabama. By late morning tomorrow, you can see some very heavy rain between Shreveport and Alexandria over to areas around Jackson and Montgomery. And then through the evening, it's the Gulf Coast, even portions of southern Georgia and North Florida. Jacksonville area could see some heavier rain. Now moving into Saturday afternoon, showers and thunderstorms scattered about across the Gulf Coast. To start the weekend, we're looking at rainfall amounts highest into sections of Mississippi and Louisiana. That's where we could see 3 to 5 inch totals. Outside of that, 1 to 2 inch areas between Montgomery and Mobile, a few areas into Georgia too. Rainfall to come across Florida will be higher, especially into the southern part of the state. Cooler temperatures are also on the way for our Labor Day weekend. You can expect below average temperatures for millions of people. So a lot of you will be enjoying some really comfortable outdoor weather. Also, of course, keeping an eye on the tropics as we head